Hi everyone, my name is Lissa and I am going to be showing you a little bit about working with the Silhouette Cameo today to make shadow puppets. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. I'm going to talk you through some of the stuff you'll find in stores in terms of brands and I'll go through the software, and then I'll give you a demo on how I used it when I was doing the puppets for Whale Fall, which you maybe saw earlier. If you haven't, you can stream it later. You can stream it all the way up until we start again next week. So with that, I am going to go ahead and start my presentation here. All right. So about me, like I said, my name is Lissa Trummel. I worked for the Allen County Public Library as a Maker Lab guide for 7 years. While in the Maker Lab, I taught everything from sewing to vinyl cutting to 3D printing to coding. Basically almost everything and anything you could think of. One of the things I worked with a lot was a Silhouette Cameo. I would also help people with their projects and talk them through occasionally when they were having issues. While in that area, I was also a prop and puppet builder on my own as a freelance artist for a couple of theaters in the area. And I was the production designer, puppet builder, and main puppeteer for the music video Whale Fall for Silhouette Cameo. I am currently a graduate student in animatronics at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. And I am currently serving on the board of directors of Puppeteers of America as secretary of the board. So now that you know a little bit about me, let's talk about these vinyl cutters. So what are these things? Vinyl cutters, they're also usually called craft cutters. They are popular with paper crafters a lot because they can cut cardstock and they can cut it really well. They will also cut vinyl and a whole host of other materials too. They can usually be found in most major craft stores. So we're talking Joann's, Michael's, Hobby Lobby, places like that. And like I kind of indicated before, depending on the machine, it can cut a variety of materials. Some of the older machines really only cut paper and thin materials. Nowadays, they're starting to get a little bit beefier in what they can handle. So now some of them can handle craft foam, balsa wood, stuff like that. There are usually two main brands you will find in stores. Silhouette from Silhouette America and Cricut from Cricut. And Cricut has a bunch of different lines. Silhouette has a couple machines, but they cut really well. And the machines now are very similar. If you look at Cricut's line and Silhouette's lines, you will see that they usually both have a dual cartridge. They can both cut a fair amount of materials. So I found in my study and research that the big difference between them tends to be software. But why do you want to use these for shadow puppets? There's a few different reasons. You can easily repeat things. So if you need to cut a bunch of things, like let's say you're working on a music video like I was, I needed to be able to have backups in case one of the shadow puppets broke or got broken in transit. So I was able to easily repeat how many I needed. Easy rescalability. If you've already watched Whale Fall, you may have noticed that we have a couple of different sizes of whale. Because I wasn't sure what the camera was going to be able to handle, and because I knew we needed like different viewpoints of the whale. I was able to easily make it really big or make it smaller. And it also allows you to save the patterns in case you need to remount the show several years later. I know a lot of people sometimes in moves and things like that, they wind up losing some of the stuff for their shows, so they've got to redo the entire thing. If you have it saved and if you back up your computer, you should be able to save these so then you have them later to cut. It's just a matter of keeping things up to date. The other thing I like about it is it will cut faster and more precisely than a human. I know for a fact I am not great at drawing straight lines. I tell people that usually right up front when I'm drawing something. But I know a computer can draw a square pretty accurately, and it will also cut it faster than I will. So that's another reason why I like to use it, is because it usually goes a little bit faster than what I can do. And the other thing I really like about it is it allows for adjustments. So let's say I'm having a problem drawing a fin, to keep using the whale fall example. I can draw the general shape I want it in and then adjust it in the computer later. And the other thing to take into consideration is by cutting with a machine, you're also saving your wrist from carpal tunnel. So just a few things to keep in mind. That's why I like to use these for shadow puppets. I know other people also like to use them as well. So let's talk about the software that I mentioned before. So there's, like I said, Cricut and Silhouette. They're the two major brands that you'll find in these craft cutting lines. Cricut's software is cloud-based. It usually means you need an internet connection to use it, and it may also mean that your files will get saved to the cloud unless you remember to export them. I personally didn't like it. I also didn't find their interface too intuitive, in my opinion. Things were in weird places and it would put things in different spots than what I expected. Silhouette software, on the other hand, can be installed on the computer. So you don't need an internet connection to use it, only for downloading it for the installation. And you can save the files directly on your computer. So this is great if you're doing this, like let's say you're making shadow puppet kits and you're doing it at a craft fair. Craft fair doesn't have an internet connection for some reason, maybe it's outside. In order for you to use your Silhouette, you don't need the internet connection at that point. You just need to be able to hook it up to the computer and run it. And like, you know, I used to live in an apartment that I didn't have Wi-Fi. It was easier to just go down the street to the coffee shop rather than try to figure out how to get someone over to install Wi-Fi at my apartment. So I really enjoyed using the Silhouette stuff, and it also works a little more intuitively, I think. And I'll be showing you that in a little bit here. So let's go ahead and look at Silhouette software. And I will try to go from the beginning. We're gonna have to get rid of some stuff here. All right, so a couple of things to know before we get started, mostly on navigating the space. So this white piece of paper, this white square represents a 12-inch by 12-inch area of material. You can adjust this. Let's say you're working 8.5 by 11 because you're using copy paper to prototype something. You can change that up here. There we go. To 8.5 by 11. I suggest typing it in because the increments this goes in when you use the arrows is very small. If you need to change the orientation, you can do that here. You've maybe noticed that on the white square, there is a red box. That red box represents the area that the machine is actually going to cut in. So if you notice on this white box, it's not cutting down here. We're going to change an option here. It's our cutting mat, and I'll go into a little bit more later about what a cutting mat is and what you use it for. So I'm going to go ahead and change it to the Cameo 12 by 12. So now you can see it's put that red line nearly all the way out. You'll want to use a cutting mat either for small pieces of material or if you're doing anything that doesn't have a backing to it and may slip and slide around in the machine as it's cutting. So we're going to leave this on. Excuse me, before I start going into specific examples, I'm going to show you some drawing tools and some other things you may want to use in here, whether that is for shadow puppets or other things to do as well. So you've got an arrow tool, an anchor point tool. We'll go over that when we go over tracing. We've got some line tools. We've got some drawing tools for regular geometric shapes. We have some freehand. Don't use that too much unless you've got a tablet to work with. Text. I'll mostly be going over text, squares, and lines. And then, like I said, eventually we will get into the anchor points. It's just anchor points are easier to explain when there's another project. So let's say you need a square. So we can click on this. It gives us a few different options. I'm just going to use the regular square right now. and then I can draw it out just like this. If you're familiar with using auto shapes, very similar to how auto shapes work. Now I can't right now just click on this little square right here and resize it. I actually have to go back up to my arrow tool and do that myself. I can make it bigger, I can make it smaller. You know, like let's say it was a house and this was the window, we can put it like over here and make it bigger. If we only want to make it taller, I can use that in the middle to make it taller. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring it down again. So you can see it's a very easy thing to manipulate, easy thing to work with. If you need to rotate, that's what this green dot is up here for. So if you need more of a diamond shape, or you can also, you can also always come up in here and adjust that way as well. And I'll go into that in a little bit here. So that's how you draw a shape. If you want to draw a line, you can just click and drag all the way across. Lines are great for a couple different things. I've used lines when I've been cutting something on a roll of vinyl and I need a guide to cut later, so then I've got a nice smooth edge for when I go to reuse the vinyl. I've also used it to divide objects, like when I was teaching at the library, one of the things we would do is use vinyl to make stencils. So I would sometimes put a line between one stencil and the next one to make it easier to cut them away from each other. Or if you're doing something that's a really intricate design, you may want to use these to put what's called in relief lines. Relief lines make it a little bit easier to peel the extra vinyl away when you're all done cutting. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. One of the other things you may want to use is fonts. Title cards for your shadow piece, text within a scene of your shadow piece. This thing can cut at different sizes. I'm going to type in whale fall to use as an example. So to change this, let's say I don't like the Arial, I'm going to go ahead and click and drag over it. And then I can come up here and just like in Word, I can change the font to whatever I want. I'm going to change it to this one because it looks just slightly more fun than Times New Roman. Then what you can do, you can, like I said, make it bigger. So if it was a title card, you can make it really big and then centered if you wanted to, or you can make it really small. And then it's about the right size to put within a scene in your piece. I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger so we can see it again. So one of the other things you may want to do is reflect it, because as we know, sometimes in shadow puppetry, we need things to be backwards so the audience will see it correctly, but we won't. So to do that, you're going to click on mirror and tell it to flip horizontally. If you are using something called heat transfer vinyl, this is also something really good to know because you do need to put things backwards in heat transfer vinyl. So you'll want to do that there. Let's see, let's say, let me undo this really quick, Control Z. Let's say you're working with a cursive font. So we'll grab this one right here. You can see there are some spots. I'm going to zoom in. Let's pick a spot to zoom in at actually. So right here, you can see the font is overlapping right there, and where the A runs into the L and where the L runs into the other L. So if you're working with cardstock or vinyl, it will actually cut those lines out right there. So you'd wind up peeling it away and there's a chunk. If you're using it as a stencil, not such a bad thing, but if you're using it for anything else, that might get a little tricky. So one of the things you're going to want to do is use something called the Weld Tool. So I'm going to click on this again. And right here is Weld. So this makes it all one shape. And we're going to give it a second because it's going to have to take our font and create shapes. But what it's going to do, and you can see there's all kinds of little spots because I picked a weird font to use. So for right now, I'm going to group it together as well, so then it would move everything at once. And when I go to zoom in where we were before, you can see right here, now it's connected. So it's not going to do those weird cutouts. And you'll be able to put the entire thing in there. You won't have to worry about missing any pieces when you go to pull it away. And if you're using a cardstock, it'll keep it together as well. All right, so I think I have covered most of the things that you will want to do from scratch. I'll show you an example of where I use that rectangle tool a lot. That would be on my city here. So on the city, I knew drawing repeated squares and rectangles, not my strong suit, but the computer is so accurate and does it so well, I decided to use the computer instead to cut these out. Excuse me, 1 minute. So to cut these out, I knew the computer would do it better than I would, so I set them up in here. You'll maybe notice that there are a couple of spots where it kind of overlaps a little bit. That's because I didn't use the weld on this version of the city. And I'll show you here with this one right here why I didn't do that necessarily, or I did it and then revised it later. So when I weld these, it loses my windows. And I can move these around, but like I said, I have no windows now. So I had to redo the windows in these. But it did give me an idea of how to lay them out. But it also saved me time because the size I was working at, you can see right here, here's your dimensions. This was about 2 inches by 4 inches. I'm a decent cutter, but I'm not a great cutter. So being able to set it up like this made it a lot easier, and I was able to cut multiples out so that way then I could test, I could have spares on set, all kinds of things like that. All right, so one of the other things I told you I was going to talk about was something called tracing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out here. And this is the sleeper shark. So if you've watched Whale Fall, then you might look familiar because the sleeper shark is one of the first ones that usually come upon a whale carcass and eat it. So this was one that I wanted to make sure we had in there was the sleeper shark. So what I did was I took my sketch, I drew it for a little bit, and then I went over it in black Sharpie to darken the line. It makes it easier to see for the computer. And then I came over here. There's a little button here. This will open the trace panel. Some say it looks like a piece of buttered toast. Some say it looks like a butterfly. Either way, it's the trace panel. So I'm going to zoom in here a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to click on Select Trace Area. And what this will let me do is draw a box over my sleeper shark here. And we're going to give it a second, and it outlines it. So anything you see in yellow, it is going to get a trace on. I can adjust that a little bit by coming over here to threshold and reducing it a little bit, but you want to be careful because if you go too far, then it's not going to cut anything or it's not going to trace anything. But I think this was enough for demonstration purposes to show you a little bit about what it does. So I can tell it to trace, and it traces both the outside of the line and the inside of the line. I don't necessarily need the inside of the line. So what I'm going to do, actually, I don't really need that outside line. And what I look at when I'm looking at this is, did it keep the shape? Where do I have the clearest part of the shape? And where is it really, really funky? And like right over here, we can see it kind of went over a little bit. Over here, it's kind of funky. Over here, it's really funky. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get rid of my outer line a little bit. I won't go through the entire process of getting rid of the outside line because it can be it can be a bit of a process. But honestly, being able, some of the benefits I found outweighed that time I felt. So this is what I was talking about when I said anchor points. I'm going to move my sketch out of the way here and double click. So I did that by double clicking. You can also just click on it with your arrow and then click on this icon over here and it brings up the anchor points. If you work with Adobe Illustrator or Inkscape, you may also be familiar with these. So I am going to actually come down over here What I'm going to do is I'm going to select one, and then I can come over here to my point editing panel and just tell it either to start deleting points, or I've got one highlighted here, so I can hold down my shift key and select multiple points at once. That's kind of a tight area, so I'm not going too nuts on getting every single one, because I know I'm going to have to go back. And then I can either tell it to delete points up there, or I can come back down to here and do it again. So I've got a fair amount there, and I can actually press the delete key on my keyboard and it gets rid of them. Now, let's say there's an area in here. I'm going to zoom in again. Let's say this area over here. It's not quite going out the way I want it to. It's not quite curved. So what I can do is come over here. I'm going to make sure it's going the right way. So I want to work on that segment there that's highlighted in red. What I can do is I can now come over here to the point editing and tell it to make a curve, and it curves it. And I know this point is in a very little spot, so I'm going to click on delete point and it's going to get rid of it. And then I can actually move these points if I want to. So I can just take this, push it out ever so gently, and then it gets it into place where I would like it. And let me scroll down here a little bit. Now let's say I didn't want that to be curved. I actually wanted it flat. I can click on make flat up here and it'll flatten it out as well. Now let's say neither one of those worked for what I wanted to do. You'll notice that there are some little purple points that sometimes show up with these anchor points. You can click on those and actually use it to adjust the line in several different ways. So I can make it really curve this way. I can make it really curve that way if I wanted to. I can adjust just how steep the curve is by coming closer or further away to the anchor point, and things like that. The reason we're seeing all these little artifacts in weird spots is because what happens is the software picks up on pixels. So it picks up on each individual little pixel. I took these with my phone. My phone is several years old, so it's not the highest quality photo. I'm sure if you had either a scanner or a better camera than what I do, you would be able to get a better picture, and you may not have nearly as much pixelization as I had. You can also use PNGs, or if you draw in Illustrator or Inkscape, you can save something as a PNG and bring it in, and those usually go a lot better. And then I'm going to come up here, and so I basically went through that process a lot, and this is what I came up with. You may notice that there's still little jogs and things that if you were looking to go perfect, you maybe wouldn't want, but I really wanted it to have a hand-drawn feel to it still. So I wanted to keep that in there because yes, I could have gone through, so here it is in the anchor points, and you can see like there's maybe a little bump or two right here. See, so to me, that was like, those would have been natural things I would have done if I was cutting it out myself. I wouldn't have had necessarily the absolute perfect straight line like I knew the computer could do. We all, our hands shake after a while. We're maybe not steady with an X-Acto blade. So I wanted to keep that in there to keep it human. And so when I zoom out, yeah, there are still some anchor points and maybe some weird spots, but overall, it's got that basic shape of the sleeper shark that I wanted. I also used this when we were working on the cars. So the cars were a little bit of a special thing because we wanted them to light up in addition to being shadows. So I needed to figure out how to run a battery in there. And because we weren't using this for like hours and hours and hours upon set, I could get away with not having to do a bunch of heavy duty wiring, like wiring up a switch to turn it on and off between takes. I just used a simple 2032 coin cell style battery. So when I put it in my sketchbook, I kind of made sure that I had the curve up there, and I made sure that the battery would be covered all in this area right here. And then I did the same thing that you just saw me do for the sleeper shark. I did a trace on it, and then I neatened up the lines as I needed to. And let's see, I can tell it to trace. And there we go. So in this case, I did keep the outside line. I got rid of the inside line. There is a spot though that I am going to show you something else you can do with anchor points. So you'll notice right in here, we would want that to connect because we want that to be the front of the car. So what you can do is you can go into anchor points, and I am not going to worry about this at all. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to click on this. Oh, and for some reason, I have noticed that Silhouette can sometimes be a little buggy about when it pops up certain panels. So just keep that in mind as you use it. So right now my panel is up here. So I want to do something called break path. So you can see it's telling us this is to break the outline of the shape at the selected node, remove any fills as the shape will no longer be closed. So in this case, we want to put the closure in a different spot. So I'm going to break the path right here. I'm going to take this away, and then I'm going to come down here and break the point down there. And the reason I drag certain parts or the nodes away from each other is because it is very easy to accidentally put these back together again. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this and connect it to that one. And so that starts to make the front of my car. And let's see, we can go ahead and come up here to make curve, and we can see it curves it out nicely, probably a lot better than the other example I was showing you. And then I can come over here, oops, see, there's that handle we were talking about before. I can come over here, take this node and drag it up to this one, and we're going to tell it to make it curve again. And we're going to bring it out this way and bring it up like that. And there we go. So now we've got part of our headlight, we've got the front of our car, and we've got, and this we would probably get rid of because we wouldn't need that in the middle. So that's another way you can use anchor points, is to connect things. Sometimes I've done it when the computer has done a weird trace and like part of my inner line would actually work better with my outer line, all kinds of things like that. Another way I use this software when making this stuff is to help me with sketching. So one of the things I ran into was the icebreaker, no pun intended. So I was struggling with how do I draw this bottom. I knew roughly how I wanted it to look, but I wasn't sure I was getting the scale right. So what I was able to do was, you can see here, this was one version of the icebreaker. I had, it cut out on the Silhouette, and then I taped it right into the sketchbook and then just drew underneath it what I wanted the bottom to look like based on some of the things I was seeing in my research. So I was able to then fix up that trace. So I did the same trace thing. And this way then I was also able to figure out, well, do I want to keep it attached or do I want to make it detachable? Because we would be using several different versions of this icebreaker as well, because we had close-ups, we had far away shots. And we were playing a little bit with the horizon line. So it kind of became, well, what do you see? What's the perspective of the camera? So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about materials and some of the accessories. So I used a lot of cardstock. I used a lot of poster board. I also used acetate and I also used vinyl. So what I did for the whale was because I knew I had to figure out how do I keep those belly lines on there to give you the impression that it was a humpback whale instead of a different kind of whale, because there are many different species of whale. So I decided to do it in vinyl. The reason I decided to do it in vinyl was because the vinyl acts almost like a sticker because it has an adhesive backing. So what that would mean for me is once I took away everything I didn't want from the vinyl, I could take a piece of what's called transfer paper or transfer tape. If you're in a pinch, you can use masking tape if you can't find it. And I put that over the entire whale, and then I could take that and put it on acetate because it will stick to the acetate. And you can also cut the acetate on the silhouette if you want. So let's say for a second that you've got another character you want to work on, kind of like what I'm talking about, but instead of what I wound up doing was I cut the acetate by hand after that. I've done other projects where I've cut acetate on the silhouette, but in this case, I wasn't sure how much I wanted to do yet. So, and I was testing a lot too, but it turned out my tests were actually pretty good. So one thing you can do if you're looking to have the machine cut everything for you, which is wonderful when you can do that. I'm gonna go ahead and go back into Silhouette, and I am going to go into my city thing here. I would sometimes cut multiple things, so sometimes multiple things got saved into one file. I'm going to grab my swordfish. Or actually, you know what? Let's grab the squid, because the squid is the next closest thing to the whale because it's got this here where it may need to be reinforced because I had some very thin points there. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my squid. We're going to get rid of the whale fall title there and put it in here. What I can do is something called an offset. So that's this thing here. It can be a bit of a finicky tool. So right there is the offset. It put it in automatically for us. You can see it made an outline. And it will allow me to adjust it. So if I wanted a bigger one for some reason, the nice thing about acetate, you can't see it when you're working with shadow puppets. So it's all up to you. If it was something where like you needed a little more playroom to be able to attach, let's say some fishing line, like you needed to suspend it, you could offset it enough that you could get a hole punch in there, punch your hole for your fishing line, and then run it wherever you needed to. I'm going to go ahead and make it smaller just a little bit because I'm going to show you some stuff with cutting. And now we're going to tell it to apply. So let's say this is what we want to cut out, but we want it cut out in 2 different materials. So we're going to come over here to send. And you can see right now, everything is outlined. I'm going to go ahead and change it to vinyl. Right here. So, so for vinyl, you don't always need a cut mat. Sometimes I just leave it on because I forgot to take it off. So I usually encourage people to put their things up in the corner, near the corner at least, because it helps you save on material waste. Now, let's say you don't want to cut your offset right now. What we can do is click on the offset right here and tell it no cut. So that's one way to do this. The other way is we're going to go back into our design and we're going to change the color. So this would be great if you were working on a card type thing. We can tell it we're going to go to send, but instead of staying in this menu, we're going to go to line. So now it's showing us the different colors, and we can come up here and we can tell it to add a pause. So we can tell it to pause, and then when we tell it to resume, it will cut the newer material, or if we were changing it, like let's say like I said before, let's have it draw on it. Like maybe this is something where we need the outline for something else. So we're going to change not the material, but we're going to change the action, and we're going to tell it to sketch. And so what would happen is it would go through the cut here, pause, you can switch out the tool, and then you can tell it to resume once it's doing that, and then it would draw instead. I've used this when doing some sticker circuit projects. Those involve some paper battery holders, and so I had it draw the plus and minus so then everybody would know the correct way to put their battery in. So like I said, you can have it draw, you can have it cut for you. So if you need to like mark where your hinge points are going to be, it can do that. It just requires a little bit of specialization. So Silhouette does sell these sketch pens. The packaging is a little different from this now. They look something like this. You can take the cap off, and then this just goes right in that cartridge instead of your cutting tool, and then it'll just draw it in whatever you need. So if you're a card maker as well as a shadow puppeteer, it's a great tool for doing that as well. Your blade will look something like this. If you're using an older machine, it'll look something like this. There's a band of numbers on here. I'm sorry, my lighting isn't that great. There's a band of numbers. So this band of numbers corresponds to a number in the software. So let me open that back up again. So we're back with our squid friend here. We're going to go to send, and right here you can see there's a number down there. So that would be 1 on my blade here. So I would rotate it back. But what I actually prefer to do is to do it 1 above what it states in your software here. So I would actually rotate it to 2. There's a little red line right by my fingernail. That is what lets you know what number you're at. Some of the newer machines do this for you automatically. So in that case, you do have to tell it to go 1 above. And part of the reason I do this is not everything about craft materials is standardized, as I'm sure many of you know. So by putting, by buying cardstock from one manufacturer is different from cardstock from another manufacturer, even if they're at the same weight. So by putting it 1 above, it usually cuts any of those cardstocks well. So whether I'm using the cardstock from manufacturer A or the cardstock from manufacturer B, it's going to cut through if I put it 1 above the recommended cardstock setting. So the recommended one for a plain cardstock is 3. So I put it at 4 and it cuts it well no matter what. And the other thing is not all craft supplies are labeled with what their weight is or what their or what settings they're at. So that's the other thing to keep in mind when you're doing this as well. And you can also adjust things like speed and force. So if you find it's cutting maybe a little too deeply, that's something else to keep in mind. Or if you're working with a really intricate design, you can adjust the speed. I think you want to go a little slower at that point. Some of your really thick materials, like the Silhouette I have, the thickest thing I could probably do is chipboard. And even then, that might be pushing it a little bit. So it will do 2 passes. I say proceed with caution when you're doing this. Maybe do a small test cut first to make sure it will be able to handle 2 passes. Because for some reason with the machines I typically used, it had problems, something would get knocked off kilter with the thick material. So it wouldn't always cut accurately on the second pass. Usually what I encourage is do the 1 above, maybe play around with your force a little bit, or just know that you're gonna maybe have to do a little bit of cutting, but honestly, it's not that much. Like you're not having to put a ton of pressure into cutting it like you would if you're doing it from the outset. Because I've done poster board like that. Just get it to cut the outline, and then after that, I can go in with a pair of scissors and cut out the rest of it. because usually if I was using poster board, I wasn't doing anything really intricate. The other thing to keep in mind, I say cut mat. I know when you are cutting by hand, you can use cardboard, you can use like the self-healing mats. You cannot use those on the Silhouette. Here's the reason. The Silhouette's cut mats and other cut mats as well, like Cricut, and I think there are probably some other ones out there, you might be able to find a cheaper alternative that may or may not work. I usually stuck with the Silhouette stuff because I had that machine. But it has a border around it that the computer kind of knows or can kind of figure out. And the other thing it has is a sticky surface to it. So this has a little bit of stick all around. Mine, as you can probably see, has got a lot of use from card making for this particular one. So the stick allows the cardstock, when you put it on here, to stick to it. So as it goes through back and forth, the paper is not going to peel up. One of the things that I learned very early on 7 years ago was that when you go to put paper through, even if it's just a simple square and you think, oh, it's a simple shape, I don't need to put it on a cut mat. Yes, you do. Because what happens is as things free up on the cardstock, it starts to shift because it doesn't have as much stuff to grab on the rollers. Because these work similar to a copier or a printer. It's a roller bar that feeds the paper back and forth, but it will not print for you. You have to have an actual printer to do that. So it will feed it in back and forth, but if it loses part of the paper underneath the roller, it's not going to go in back and forth. It's going to go back and forth and go back and shift. And then you won't get your square and it'll jam up the paper and you run the risk of ruining your blade, ruining the cartridge holder. So I really highly encourage using a cut mat. I use it for cardstock. I use it for the poster board. I also use it for any scrap pieces of vinyl. So sometimes, like I said, I also do card making. So sometimes I will have like a small scrap that I can get one or two like dots or flowers out of. So I'll put it on there, adjust my paper settings to the size that's needed and run that through there on the cut mat as well. I've also done it for heat transfer vinyl. So heat transfer vinyl, you actually wind up cutting on the back of the material. So that's why you have to mirror it before you put it on a surface. So if, let's say you are a very beginning company and you just need a simple shirt with your logo, if it's a very easy to cut kind of logo, you can do that on heat transfer vinyl and then press it onto a shirt. Just know that it may not last long term. So you may eventually want to get it screen printed or find someone to do it for you locally. Just because some of the craft vinyls don't always hold up well, or you can get an actual heat press and get actual vinyl. There's places that sell that online that you can buy from. Let's see, we've talked about vinyl, we've talked about the cut mat, we've talked about different materials you can use. I think that covers everything because I also went through the cut settings. I went through the basics of what you need to know for using the software. And I experimented with Cricut because at one point we were debating about whether or not to get a newer Cricut for the library. And so I was able to go through and play around with the software a little bit. Like I said, I didn't find it very intuitive. I found it very frustrating. And if I found it frustrating, chances are patrons are going to find it frustrating. But the Cricut software does do some very similar things to what I showed you today from what I remember. If you have any questions, I am going to throw up here on my screen, or maybe. All right, so I'm going to throw up on the screen here really quickly my contact information. If you have questions, I will be answering stuff live. I'll be around for the con in little bits and pieces. And yes, I'm happy to answer your questions, help you talk through things. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the con. You can also find this information on my artist page. And yeah, I'll see you around Virtual Puppet Con.